Time now for The Clash. And as we brace for more spiteful and unfounded swipes at the royal family in Volume 2 of Harry and Meghan's Netflix atrocity tomorrow, they've slapped us with another trailer, and it's the most disgraceful piece of propaganda yet.
It was a real kind of war against Meghan, and I've certainly seen evidence that there was negative briefing from the palace against Harry and Meghan to suit other people's agendas.
Meg became this scapegoat for the palace, and so they would feed stories on her, whether they were true or not, to avoid other less favourable stories being printed.
You would just see it play out. Like a story about someone in the family would pop up for a minute, and they go, we gotta make that go away. But there's real estate on a website homepage. There is real estate there on a newspaper front cover, and something has to be filled in there about someone royal.
This barrage of negative articles about the breakdown of the relationship with her father was the final straw in a campaign of negative, nasty coverage about her.
But while the Sussexes may think their deranged media crusade is hurting the monarchy, the biggest casualty is actually, well, it's themselves, as indicated in a bombshell new YouGov poll. It reveals that around the release of the doc, Harry's popularity plummeted by a whopping 13 points, his joint lowest score since royal favourability polling began in 2011, with Meghan's likeability nosediving by 7 points since November. Only Prince Andrew polling lower now. So what do you think? Has the Sussexes' hate campaign against the royal family backfired? Dan at GBNews.uk, vote in our poll at GBNews. But to help you make up your mind, I'm joined by star Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, former advisor to Margaret Thatcher Niall Gardner, and Joint Secretary of Stand Up to Racism Wayman Bennett. Sarah Vine, I think this has been a spectacular own goal by Harry and Meghan. Do you agree?
Well, they've come across as, I think their timing is really bad, actually, because the Queen has only just died. And I think also there are quite a lot of serious problems in the world, and their sort of tiny violin complaining endlessly about, stuff that for most people would seem, really quite a lovely lifestyle, it hasn't really done them any favors, and they do seem really bitter and twisted. And I think quite a lot of people understand that maybe they wanted to move away from royal life. And I think particularly in the case of Meghan, I've always felt that it must have been really difficult for her because, she's an American, and that's tricky because, the royal family is not an American thing. And it's not the same as Kate, she grew up in a different environment. I mean, it's a harder thing to get your head around. So I can see how it would have been a real culture shock for her, and I can see how it would have been difficult for her. And I think people have sympathy for them, and they understand that perhaps they've decided that it's not the life they want to lead, and they want to go somewhere else, and they want to do something else. And that's all fine. The problem, I think, is this relentless trashing and bitching about the other royals. And I think that makes it feel very bitter and twisted. And that's not a good look.
And Niall Gardner, so much of this is not based on fact. I mean, you have actually described Harry and Meghan as being responsible for the biggest disinformation campaign of the past decade.
Yes, Dan, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And I have to say that, as you mentioned, Dan, this is a massive disinformation campaign by Meghan and Harry. It's an absolute disgrace. It is a hate-filled campaign against the British monarchy, also deeply insulting, I think, to the British people as well. And Meghan and Harry are hugely privileged individuals, very wealthy individuals. They're reportedly being paid up to $100 million for this Netflix docu-drama. And they are basically enriching themselves using royal titles while attacking the royal family, attacking the British people, and all of the lies and disinformation coming out over the course of the last couple of weeks or so on this Netflix documentary, I think is absolutely appalling. This is a massive disinformation campaign. They have no evidence whatsoever for all of these ludicrous accusations. And we are dealing with two immensely narcissistic individuals who care nothing at all for the royal family, who care nothing at all for the British people, and they are using their royal titles essentially to try and launch attack after attack upon the British monarchy. And I do think the late Queen would have been absolutely appalled by the behaviour of both Meghan and Harry here.
Wayman Bennett, you don't think this has backfired at all on Harry and Meghan, despite that polling? Why?
Look, I think many British establishments, when faced with the question of racism, go into denial, or, as the previous speaker said, outright lies. It may be difficult for people to understand the multiracial, multi-heritage family, particularly the royal family, which hasn't changed for centuries, being confronted with this. I'm not surprised that raising problems that exist both in the family and the institution has caused serious problems here. And I think if you look at the reality, is that if you say that you're being racially discriminated against in an institution, it's very difficult for people to accept that. Rather, what they would like to say, it's not that it's a lie. One thing people have to understand is what's on trial here is whether people can accept the 21st century, that we're going to have a multiracial, multi-heritage royal family. Internationally, in the very countries in which Britain wants to retain the royal family, Canada, Australia, and many of the former colonies, people are looking at this as exposing racism inside Britain itself. The denial isn't helpful.
Wayman, can I just ask what evidence you have that the royal family is racist? Because I certainly haven't seen Harry and Meghan produce any evidence. Maybe they will tomorrow, but I haven't seen any so far.
Look, I understand that in this country, if you raise the, former Prince Philip, the statements that he raised about people from other countries were clearly racist. They weren't challenged by the British press because the tradition inside this country is not.
Oh, come on! His gaffes were challenged every single time. His gaffes were challenged every time.
I'll finish my point. It must be very difficult if you're in a family which is both black and white to stomach racism. This government itself went through a very careful report to say that racism didn't exist inside this country. Some of the people that you've got up there from the Daily Mail, they've been taken to court by Prince Harry themselves because of threats of investigation into their
Sarah Vine, you want to come in there?
So what I'm trying to say is that they have a vested interest. They have a vested interest in denying the claims of
Wayman. You've made your point, Wayman. Let Sarah respond.
I have not been taken to court. I would also like to add that when Prince Harry
the Daily Mail
said some very racist things when he was younger and dressed up as a Nazi and made lots of other racial slurs, that we were very hard on him. I don't think this is just about racism. I think that the notion that just because you disagree with the way a person behaves makes you racist if that person is a person of colour is silly. It's not true. People don't dislike Meghan because of her colour. They dislike Meghan because of the way she has behaved. And that is a very different thing. It's not necessarily racism. You cannot describe...
Gaslighting people and pretending that racism doesn't exist is a British tradition. And I'm sorry, I'm not surprised that the panel itself is up here telling people that racism, that the royal family does not have racism in it. Only last week, somebody was rebuked for how they spoke to somebody from
Lady Susan Hussey.
There's a lot of denial about this.
But I don't believe that what Lady Susan Hussey did was racist.
Look at the speed of action that the palace took with that. Within 12 hours, she had.
Can I just say, but also look at the reaction of much of the media that went into denial and talked about her age and how it was appropriate. We're being dragged into the 21st century with these families.
Wayman, given your hair defending Harry and Meghan, though, Sarah's just made a very pertinent point. The British press and the British public absolutely celebrated the union of Harry and Meghan. I remember that time. I remember the day of their wedding. The entire country stopped. It was actually one of the happiest days that this country has had in a very, very long time, certainly since the London 2012 Olympics. What happened is that Meghan was accused multiple times behind the scenes by royal staff, by courtiers, of bullying. She was reprimanded by the Queen, the late Queen. She was reprimanded by Kate Middleton. You don't seem to think at all that Meghan's behaviour is responsible for the change in the tone of the coverage.
Look, I'm not defending the behaviour of, as you said, very privileged people. What I am saying is the institution itself, the monarchy, the idea that it's beyond reproach, that in the 21st century, I mean, you have to understand that the majority of people questioning that they're font of all honour, right? There's generations of people that saying that institutionally it no longer fits.
But the thing is, Wayman, you're making a comment that is factually incorrect. I mean, I can point to loads of columns that Sarah Vine has written and that I have written that have held the royal family to account on many issues. If it wasn't for the British press, Prince Andrew would never have been exposed for his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. So, Sarah Vine, I just think this is a completely unfair representation.
If any one of us faced
Wayman, let Sarah respond.
Andrew faced, they would be in prison, right? So the fact that they're faced
it would
with
never have been exposed without the British press, Wayman. It would never have been exposed without the British press. Sarah, you come in.
No, I just think it's unfair to say that the British press have focused on Meghan because of her colour. It has nothing to do with that.
Straight out of Compton.
You know, we've been much harder.
Do you think Kate Winslet would have been called straight out of Compton?
Sorry?
Come on. Let's be honest. There's a level of racism within the British press, and it's been exposed.
Rubbish.
It's uncomfortable.
It has not. It has not. You're talking rubbish.
We need to get over
Find me the evidence, because one headline talking about the location of where Meghan lived is not proof of racism. Niall Garner, do you want to come in?
Yes, if I could add here that I think Sarah's absolutely right. The British press are not racist. Thank God for the British press holding people in tremendous power and privilege to account. The British press does a wonderful job there. Also, this idea that the royal family is racist is complete and utter nonsense.
I beg to differ.
This is just manufactured.
Look, listen. We've had prime ministers describe Muslim women as bank robbers.
You know,
right?
the criticism of Meghan Markle has nothing at all to do with her race. In fact, I've spoken to a lot of Americans here in the United States. I'm based here in Washington. But many Americans who are absolutely appalled by Meghan Markle's behaviour. Americans of all races. I've not spoken to a single American who actually thinks that Meghan Markle actually is right in her condemnation of the royal family. In fact, she's come at a very heavy part here in the United States, as she has done in the United Kingdom.
Indeed.
All of these claims about racism, complete utter.
What people feel in America.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been a spirited debate. Thank you very much for having it. Former advisor to Margaret Thatcher, Niall Gardner, Joint Secretary of Stand Up to Racism, Wayman Bennett, and star Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine. So who do you agree with? Has Harry and Meghan's Netflix hate campaign against the royal family backfired?